Welcome to another in our seminar series. Today's topic is Transformational Education and Knowledge Facilitation. Our presenters are Karthika Sajeev Changam, Pina Bulc, Ximena Zeballos, and Isha Kakkad Lakhani. So about today's presenters. Karthika Changam is the Director of Operations and Partnerships with the International Center of Humanity. She is a strategist and social impact practitioner dedicated to advancing community-driven development through collaboration, systems thinking, and participatory approaches. As Director of Strategic Partnerships at the International Center of Humanity, she works to build meaningful partnerships across geographies, bringing together organizations, practitioners, and communities through a shared commitment to humanity and collective actions. Her work spans program strategy, partnership development, and community engagement, with a focus on strengthening access to knowledge, fostering inclusive and sustainable systems, and supporting locally led solutions to complex challenges. She has worked closely with communities and local partners in Cuba, contributing to initiatives such as Patria Libros, which expands access to books and learning resources, and Patria Siembra, a community-led program that strengthens food security and regenerative agricultural practices. Through these initiatives, she has supported collaborative models that combine local knowledge, education, and sustainable development to address community priorities. Working across cultural and geographic contexts, Karthika is committed to creating spaces where people, ideas, and institutions can learn from one another and work collectively towards shared aspirations. Through her work, she continues to advocate for approaches that are collaborative, equitable, and rooted in the belief that meaningful transformation begins by strengthening the capacity of communities to shape their own futures. Her colleague, Pina Bulc, is the Director of Strategic Programs, also with the International Center of Humanity. Pina is a youth leader, digital strategist, and systems thinker dedicated to fostering regenerative futures through collaboration, creativity, and meaningful engagement. At the center, she works to amplify diverse voices with care, clarity, and purpose, sharing narratives that connect people, ideas, and communities across cultures. On functioning under the belief that effective communication is not simply about sharing information, but about creating understanding, inspiring participation, and strengthening collective action. So Pina serves also as a curator at Eco-Civilization, where she designs global dialogues, learning experiences, and creative campaigns that encourage systems thinking, collective responsibility, and regenerative action. So we're looking forward to hearing more from Pina this morning. With Karthika and Pina, we have Isha Kakkad Lakhani. Now, Isha is an author, educationist, and mental wellness advocate. She's committed to building more human-centered schools. So that leads her work, focuses on creating learning environments where emotional well-being, belonging, and meaningful relationships are recognized as essential to educational success. She's a noted author of a well-known book called The Better School. And this book was presented at the New Delhi World Book Fair and the Goa Book Festival. And it has inspired discussions among educators across India and hopefully across the world on reimagining schools as communities rather than merely institutions. Isha has worked with schools, universities, and organizations to promote more compassionate and future-ready education systems. So she has collaborated with UNESCO, Eco-Civilization, the International Center of Humanity, and her work has been featured in publications such as the Free Press Journal, DNA India, and Midday. She leads the FAIR project, FAIR project, which is a national experimental youth program that equips young change makers to engage thoughtfully with complex societal issues through dialogue, research, and action. Isha continues to advocate for an education system that values human flourishing, mental wellness, and compassionate citizenship alongside academic achievement. And so we look forward to hearing more from Isha this morning. And with her is Ximena Zeballos, who is the Educational Development Director with the ICH, the International Center for Humanity. Like Isha, Ximena is an educator. She's also a project facilitator and systems thinker dedicated to advancing transformative education through collaboration, creativity, and intercultural learning. She has worked across Bolivia and Argentina, designing and facilitating educational initiatives that respond to children's interests, align with curriculum goals, and empower communities to create meaningful local change. And so she believes that this connection creates learning environments that are purposeful and enable young people and educators to engage thoughtfully with the world around them. So her work at the ICH facilitates the development of innovative learning programs that encourage collaboration, critical thinking, and meaningful engagement with complex global challenges. So this morning, I welcome my three amazing colleagues, and I look forward to hearing from you. As a programming note, Pina may not be joining us. If she does, we welcome her. In the meantime, Karthika, I look to you to fill in for her participation. So over to you all. I will retreat and listen, and we'll follow through with questions. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Yonette. Thank you. Thanks a lot for that introduction. I'm just going to start presenting as well. And I hope it works for everybody. Firstly, again, thank you, Yonette, for that wonderful introduction and for inviting us and giving us this space to talk about something that we all feel quite passionately about. But before we move on to talk about transformational education and knowledge facilitation and International Center of Humanity, I'd like to begin with two disclaimers. One is just our thoughts about transformational education itself. It's a learning process. So usually how people perceive it, it's a learning process which can create deep and long-lasting changes in a person's worldview, in the way they perceive things and understand reality. What we've understood with the work that we've been doing so far is that the goal of transformational education is not transformation itself. It is the choice that transformation is possible. So I'd like to begin with that thought that today we might be talking about ideas and thoughts and concepts which may or may not resonate with you. The idea is not for the audience or for the people who are listening to us to agree with us 100%. Is for them to know that this exists and then do whatever they want with that piece of information. And secondly, the second disclaimer would be that there isn't anything new that we're going to be talking about today. The International Center of Humanity isn't a new concept, framework, approach that we have not seen as people. It is a space which invites all of you, whether you agree with it or not, whether you resonate with it or not, or whether you believe that this is the way to go about things or not. It is just an opportunity to share space and see what we can do together. So on that note, I would start talking a little bit about the International Center of Humanity. But like all stories, it should start from the beginning, which is how we came to be. And it all started a little while back in January 2025 in Havana, Cuba, where Havana hosted the International Conference for World Balance. And it was the coalition, so International Coalition of Humanity came together in Havana together at that point of time. This particular conference saw close to 1,500 delegates from from 98 different countries, and all of them had reached Havana with a singular goal of trying to create and build a more balanced world, a world where we don't always agree with each other, but a world where all of us can see eye to eye and communicate and figure out a way where we can all build that future together. And during this period of time, we realized that all of us came from different backgrounds. Some of us were experts in water, some of us were agriculturalists, some of us were educators, some were scientists, and some were political leaders or world leaders at that. But our disciplines, our experiences, our expertise did not stop us from finding that common thread. And that common thread led to a collective acknowledgement of the fact that a global community exists. A community which, in its own way, is working towards a singular goal. And that goal was to create a future or create a world where progress is founded in humanity, where the foundation of progress is humanity. So once that acknowledgement was said, that acknowledgement demanded that we do something about it. And International Center of Humanity was born. And on December 2025, ICH was officially established as a stichting in the Netherlands. Throughout, since December 2025, we have grown as a community. So today we have 15 advisors from 12 different countries across 6 continents. And while we were building this community, I think one of the major lessons that we learned was that our space cannot and should not ever demand something of its participants or its co-creators. Because the moment a space starts demanding or asking for people to be a certain way, it loses the essence of humanity itself. Because humanity does not manifest in one particular way, or it's not standardized, it's not homogeneous. So even within our community, we have individuals from all walks of life who have different ways of functioning, different experiences, different solutions, sometimes even for the same problem. And all of them come together and work together and are part of this particular space. What we have learned is also that when we let people be, sometimes solutions just emerge, not in a way we expected them to, but probably the way they were meant to. And it is not just sometimes our ideas and our conversations left the papers and the Zoom calls and the meetings that they were part of and actively became projects. And you'd hear a little bit about that also today. But today we have 5 active projects across the globe. We have individuals in South Africa who are engaged in agro innovation. They're creating food forests for themselves and making sure that their food chain is resilient and sustainable for the generations to come. We have the FAIR project in India, which I'm sure you'll hear a lot about very soon, in which we have young people coming together and figuring out how they can contribute to their community. We have a group of young students in Cameroon who identified that the hygiene issues in their and the waste management challenges in their cities was causing health diseases and diseases which were entirely preventable. And they started their own initiative of managing waste more conscious responsibly, of recycling plastic, and also making sure that they generate awareness along with that. We have a group of women in Chile who are actively working towards creating spaces where women can empower themselves, where young students can come and learn about circular economy and sustainable development to make sure that the entrepreneurs of today are not just thinking about their profit margins, but also about what they do to their planet. And in Cuba, which is another example, another project you'll hear a little bit more about today, we have examples of communities mobilizing themselves and working towards solving their own problem of food insecurity, where they come together and create food gardens, where they talk to each other and figure out better ways of preserving seeds, sharing resources, making sure that all the challenges that plague them can be faced together. Now, all of these problems seem different, have different contexts, languages, realities, challenges, but all of them coexist and all of them are equally valid. And this led us to think that this is exactly why we say that we're not doing anything new, because all of this has been happening for a long time. But why is ICH required then? Why do we need a space where all of us come together? Because the churning of those ideas, the sharing of that knowledge, the lending of that hand when it's the most necessary, the collaborations that come out of it, the co-creation that happens as a consequence of these conversations is how we all get together and create that collective future for all of us. So we did put on our thinking hats a little, and we wondered how can we communicate how we are functioning to a larger audience, to people who might already be functioning the way we are, but would have no clue that we are doing the same thing in a completely different corner of the world. Which led to the next slide, which I'm going to bring out, which is relating to reality. This framework is not going to give you answers. This framework is also not going to tell you how to be, how to live, how to think, or anything of that sort. It is going to provide you with an opportunity, or it's going to provide you with a space and an offer to possibly use it and decide that maybe it's not for yourself, not for you. It is about understanding what is out there and trying to decide for your own self if that is what you want. So let's start with how we began to reconcile our abstract thoughts into a little bit of structure. So we started thinking about reality itself. Within reality, we have movement, we have possibilities, and we have connections. Movement is everything that happens around us. If you're sitting down and thinking, that's movement. If we are running, that is movement. If a plant grows, that is movement. If we breathe, that is movement. And what we have understood that movement is an inevitability, and it is something that happens continuously. And every movement leads to newer possibilities. It is ever, and possibilities are ever present and are always expanding. And the way both these things connect and interact with each other are connections and in relationships that get built between movements and potential possibilities. And we have a web of possibilities that we as human beings need to understand. And that is where the challenge lies. A reality can exist independent of humanity, but humanity exists within that reality itself. So how do we relate to reality is where the challenge lies. But why does it matter? Why does it matter how we relate to reality? It might seem too abstract, but think about it this way. We communicate in a certain way today. We think about climate a certain way today. We think about how education should be taught or should be contracted in our world today. All of those things are examples of us practicing our relation to reality, understanding reality, and participating with it. It is an inevitability. It is something that all of us have to do by virtue of being existing. So what we have today is possibly one way through which we can do it in a more conscious manner. The idea is not to change the way you function. The idea is to increase the awareness and enhance your ability to see things for what they are. So we have broken it down to three major elements. Humanity can relate to reality through observing reality for what it is first, which is curiosity, something that at least I have struggled a lot with in the past, where we can often not look beyond our prejudices, stereotypes, or the lenses that we have been given since, well, we remember thinking. The idea is not to let go and think that we can get rid of those lenses, but to understand that they are part of our reality as well. My identity as a woman creates a particular perception of reality. But then how do I navigate it if I'm constantly thinking of the blinders that I have on? And the answer seemed quite simple. It's curiosity. It's looking at things from a lens of, oh, this is how it should be, or this is how I think it would be, and what is it exactly? And that small shift changes a lot in the way we observe things. The second is orienting ourselves within that reality, which is not neglecting the subjectivities we were born with, not neglecting the limitations or challenges that we face. How does my geography, my physicality, my mental health for that matter, or the relations that I have around me affect my reality? And what is the best direction for me to take within that landscape becomes the second thing that we could potentially do. And third, which is often, in my opinion, the underdog of it all, participating persistently. We often move and function thinking that it's going to lead to a particular end. And if it doesn't, it seems like a failure. And we often believe that there is a certain way of doing things. That, oh, probably you would have to be a little bit smarter to crack this particular code. I think that is this lie I told myself the most when I was in school and I had to do math and I really couldn't crack it. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I just don't have the aptitude for it. But the truth of what a bit of experience working across ecosystems have taught me is that it's often about practice. It's often about being at it over and over again, practicing, adapting, looking at things for what they are, and doing it all over again the next day. Because there are no ultimate solutions. There is no panacea waiting for humanity to come and save the world. There is practice, there is effort, there is initiative that we give and make sure that we have something left for the next generation to carry on. And it becomes a dialectic process. It becomes a process in which reality continues to give us information. And the more and more we become aware and cognizant of it, our circle of awareness keeps on increasing and expanding and contracting, which is another fun part of this entire framework, which is just because you think, just because your awareness expanded on a particular terrain does not mean that it has to remain that way. It's a continuous process of learning and growing and developing, because that is where meaning lies, in movement itself. Now, if I have discouraged a lot of you from away from the result-based framework that we all are quite used to, and I'm hoping, or at least a little short, at least one or two of you would be thinking that why would anybody do anything if this is all we're going to get out of it? We thought that it would be a good idea to let you all see a bit of work that we've been doing so far, because this is already in practice. This is not something that we came up with yesterday and think that we need to implement. It's part of practice. It's something that's already in front of us. And hopefully, through these case studies and through these examples, you'd be able to see snippets of this form of thinking, where the core is not to change the world, but to align yourself with the reality and do the best you can at that given point of time and do it over and over and over again. So, on that note, I will pass the baton to Isha and let her take this presentation forward.
Thank you so much for that, Karthika. And you really, helped us set the stage so well. So if you could take us to the next slide as well. Yes. So I'm going to be telling you a little bit about the FAIR project, which perhaps in this scenario will help you understand and put into, maybe I can help you visualize what Karthika just explained in a much more simpler way. So the FAIR project, FAIR, as you see on your screen, is an initiative of 8 Goals, 1 Foundation, Eco-Civilization, and International Center of Humanity, which just means that a lot of curious people just came together and decided one day that we don't really need to create a fellowship or another leadership program. And we definitely don't want to be in a space where we are creating academics or experts, but we really just wanted to create safe spaces for the youth of our country to understand an ever changing world. Because it became very, very obvious to us that they were feeling a little hopeless, a little dejected from the world, and were facing a little bit of a difficulty in navigating circumstances around them. So back in 2020, when we decided to launch this program, everything was planned to be an offline immersion. I mean, an offline setting, a residential program where everybody would come together for 10 days. But of course, COVID-19 had other plans, and it forced us really to move online. Nevertheless, we view every opportunity, every shift as an opportunity. And so we were very quick in pivoting to making the project an online immersive experience with diverse participation from all across the country, the length and breadth of India in that regard. And so what felt like a shift really helped us because we were able to engage beyond our scheduled calls and really have a meaningful collection during a time where everybody really was grappling with a very difficult reality. So 7 years later and 7 editions later, we've helped almost 200 plus change makers who have spoken with over 100 global experts. And all of this has been rooted around one methodology. And we've also, by the way, also published 3 books, which I'd be very happy to share the links with all of you. But this methodology that we keep talking about, right? Again, when I'll explain it to you, it is a dialectical process. There is no reinventing the wheel. We perhaps have just done a very good job of spotlighting certain things. And that journey begins with fact finding and familiarizing, where our change makers are not really looking at what to think, but how to think. They are gathering evidence before forming opinions. And then once they have done that, we pivot and we make them or curate an environment where they are advocating for alternate viewpoints, thinking diametrically opposite of what they previously used to believe in. And here, once we've made this shift, we also want to take a pause and introspect to realize the changes that we've noticed in us. What kind of biases was I feeling within myself? And then to actively reason and rationalize, where we fully recognize that based on the evidence, the information, and the research that I have in front of me, what are my next steps? And our focus is always on what's the next step. And we also, by the way, acknowledge that this step could change if new information came our way. So this was really broadly the methodology with which we've ran 7 editions, 7 years of the FAIR project. And every year, by the way, let me tell you that we decided to run the program in a different way. We decided to deal with different themes, different premises, different ways in which we would engage with the youth of the country. But our methodology was one constant that really stayed with us. So when I look back at the 7 editions that we've had, I see FAIR Project as more than a program. It's really a case study of the framework that Karthika just explained to all of us, where our change makers, or you could call them participants, began by observing their reality. And perhaps what we curate is a sense of change, a sense of a challenge, where their assumptions and opinions are taking a step where they need to look at something in a different way. They are expected to reorient themselves by engaging with diverse perspectives, and hopefully through that way they're able to see what's on the other side, right? So every year when we talk to these change makers, and once the project ends, we ask them, I was like, how was the experience for you? And they tell us how truly the safe space was, where they could be themselves without any judgment, how they discovered themselves through this immersive process because they were consciously shifting their thought process, and at the same time they were constantly adapting to what was in front of them. And this whole purpose of them being able to participate intentionally gave them a deeper understanding of relationships, of systems, of what they understood and the ways in which they understood things around them, all the hidden variables and issues that they wanted to address. And I could go on about so many of their testimonials, but over here, I'll take a minute to share about Pushpalata, who was a change maker of the 2026 cohort. And if you will just look at these photographs that she's collected along the way, she came to us for this year's theme, which was coming together for better schools. And she told us that I've often felt that in my schooling, I don't think I belonged. There were so many expectations that were put on me, and I don't think I was able to fulfill them. And she came from that space. She, of course, by the way, professionally is a frontline healthcare worker, which they are called Anganwadi workers, where they deal with maternal and child nutrition and health. And they are also expected to take care of early childhood care. So I would say preschooling is what they focus on. Right. So she has seen how education is implemented at the grassroots under governments and the kind of resources that are given. And so when she told us about her own schooling experience, she wanted to share with us, and she kept telling us that I wish schools were nurturing towards individuals' needs, their confidence, their requirements, really centering the learning process near the learner. And we said, yes, that does make sense. But what if during your A session, which is advocating for alternate viewpoint, we curated an environment where we asked her to defend schools and say that they are institutions with a mandate. And largely, the mandate is that they are expected to teach children the sense of collective responsibility, citizenship, and other common well-being ideas that the society expects. And so while they do cater to individual needs, but they cannot override the responsibility towards the society. And so schools essentially are building blocks for a democratic society. And so once she was expected to be defending that stance, things shifted. She started researching. She started, reading articles, doing her own, fact finding into what this persona and what this perspective could mean. And so when she came through all of that and throughout her engagement with the project, she was one of the most conscientious thinkers who was sometimes afraid and introverted to share her thoughts, but nevertheless would not stop herself or hesitate in putting that front. And she expressed her interest that she is very curious into looking into the hidden curriculum of schools, which are essentially these values, these cultural practices that one abides naturally and organically while being on a campus. And so when she started her field visits, she visited rural government schools, and as you can see from the photographs, they do have minimal resources, right? But regardless of that, she said, okay, let me find a way, let me do my own digging into how I can make them more learner centric. But the minute she reaches these schools, she immediately realizes that there are
Oh, I think we might have lost Isha there.
I think we might have lost Isha. Just a moment. This is these are the vicissitudes of being in India, in the UK, in the US, in Germany, where Ximena is. So I wonder if Ximena would like to pick up where, and then when Isha comes back on, we can proceed. What do you think, Karthika? Or would you like to pick up for Isha?
We can talk. I'd just like to continue her tangent.
Yes.
So that we can
okay, so go for it. Brilliant.
Perfect. No, so as Isha was talking about how during the A, Pushpatalata really had to think through and focus on not just what she believed in, but why she believed in what she did, and actively put herself in a position where she's advocating and defending positions that she has so staunchly rejected for so long. And that simple exercise changed and shifted the way she was looking at the entire ecosystem. It made her more empathetic and understanding towards how the entire ecosystem was developing. It made her a more aware thinker because rather than rejecting the things that she had deemed to be unfavorable, she was actively engaging with them. And that's when it started. She did not need commonality to belong anywhere. She did not need relatability to feel like it's her space and to own it. When she became an aware thinker within that ecosystem, and what we'd like to reiterate during this particular period of time is not that it was the process which helped Pushpalata reach there. It was her own choices and her own decision to take on certain challenges, to take on certain realities, and see through them, which led her to the place she ultimately ended up being. And we saw that shift almost in the span of 2 months, where from a person who was not really willing to communicate as much in group calls because there was too many people around, to a person who was shining and sharing her experience and owning the space that she so rightfully deserved. And the cohort itself embraced that because at the end of the day, something that we've been told continuously is that homogeneity is something that is desired. But in my experience and in our experience of having run the FAIR project for the past 7 years, what we've learned is that it's often differences which connect people. It is often the things that they find, curious about the other person, or something that triggers their intrigue, that lead to friendships being made. And it's that process which truly opened our eyes to how these young adults were navigating their own reality. And if they were just put in that uncomfortable position for just a little while, it could open a completely different world for them. And I see that we have Isha back here. So, Isha, why don't you take it forward?
Yes, thank you so much for that. So, yeah, I mean, really, I'm sure Karthika has already told you so much about her experience for Pushpalata's story. But what I really want to share with all of you is that, her story is not exceptional. Over 7 years, we've been watching so many young individuals go through similar transformations. And each cohort, when they are done with the project, they don't leave with a sense of certainty, but they leave with better questions. And to each cohort, there are certain things that we keep reiterating. One is there are no winners or losers at FAIR project. There is no competition that's going on between all of you. And just, I mean, sometimes the world really labels us as hypocritical human beings because we've changed the way we think. But to them, we say, why not? Because new information has reached us and we must adapt. And sometimes we also tell them and remind them that just because you've started doing something does not mean you stop thinking. And just because you've started thinking does not mean that you stop doing. You have the right to change your mind when new facts keep emerging. And so for me, the FAIR project is really a living laboratory of how people learn, how they reshape their assumptions, and how they make new possibilities emerge. So it's been a joy to witness the youth of India adapt to the FAIR mindset and build a stronger community and network of change makers, because once a change maker, always a change maker. And with that, over to you, Ximena.
Thank you very much, Isha. I think that's a magnificent and solid example of how the framework of the movement that the ICH is working for is incarnated. And I just want to share another example in the other part of the world in a beautiful little spot. So basically, I would like to share like a story because it's a place very close of the city center. Just imagine a small land, a forgotten land, like those where you can find tall grass, garbage, and even left debris. And you could see like the whole movement of the city, and this was just a forgotten piece, no? But there was a person that would come and each day take a piece out of it, take a garbage, take a debris. And at that exact time, another person was just passing by. Actually, it was a cultural street, and she was admiring, as you can see in the slide, the beauty in the street, the art, the color, the artistic expression. And in that moment of contemplation and admiration, she also realized there was someone doing something. And that's when actually Karthika met Pinheiro. Um, I just also want to share this beautiful quote from a Cuban artist that says, "Art is revelation, it's a window open to an unknown." And I think that's what happened in that exact instant. So before continuing with this story, I just want to tell you a bit more about this place. So it's actually in the city center of Havana, Cuba. And Cuba is one of those fascinating countries that their story is misunderstood abroad. And that even once you visit, which was a bit my case, you can see the contradictions of the decisions of the story. The dreams are still floating in the air. Like, this is a country where people speak out loud about their dreams and aspirations, but they don't only speak about what they dream, what they would want to do, but actually the desire of their community, their beloved people, their country. They dream out loud for the better for their surrounding. So with this background, you could feel the optimism of no matter what, we can do it. But somehow there was again this contradiction of a lost land, someone doing something, and dreams. So what was going on here? And in this context, in this complexity, someone dared to look deeper, to understand all the lines connecting, like spider web that is connecting different dots of the reality, and understand the social complexity. Cuba has a very critical situation with its economy, with food supply, with energy supply, with health situation. It's like quite dramatic. But once you're able to understand or go layer by layer, understanding the situation, you decide on what to do. So Karthika was okay. There's something going on here, and something is starting. There's a movement in these conditions, in this situation, and actually there is a possibility. So not all of these problems are making it impossible to work towards something, but they're actually enabling the possibility to create something. So from one dreamer to an observer to a whole community coming together, we were suddenly last year, January, coming people from abroad, from South Africa, India, Slovenia, Germany, Chile, um, the UK. We were people from all over the world just coming to this little land, which was completely transformed. So at the left, you will find Pinheiro, this humble and simple man doing this daily labor of acting for its community, and how that intention and that action was contagious to this whole community, not only locally, but also internationally. And if we think about this complexity of movement, of intention, of constant practice, I think the framework with all the conceptual connotations just becomes pure magic in life. So once you see the organic movement of how life unveils, you just see the simplicity out of it. So it's human effort to make everything complicated, but actually when you have things clear, which is the next step, and just go for it, life continues unveiling. So basically, the Callejón de Hamel is a garden project to provide food sovereignty, because there's a huge lack of food, and even when, let's call dryness or even lack of hands, and there are complicated moments, life continues unveiling. So we were once there, we were helping, we were putting our hands together, but then we all left. And what happens next? Does it all fall into Pinheiro's responsibility? Not necessarily, or does it? And then it's just something so alive. And then there's a new need, and then a high school actually has the need also to get their own supplies, and they get in contact with Pinheiro. And now they're also not only learning about permaculture, putting their hands on the soil, but actually working consciously with their community to solve a critical problem for their immediate needs. And that's going to be something that's going to I mean, again, we're not planning towards the future, but just being active in this exact precise moment, they are already opening so many opportunities to the future. So I think that's more my take in. I think we are a group of dreamers, an organization that brings optimism with a strong framework that we say and we still think this is possible. Um, and we just want to share this light of optimism with everyone to see the magic that is being done everywhere, every day, every instance. It's just a matter of opening the eyes and understanding what's going on from different perspectives and choosing which perspective each of us want to stand and where do we want to work from. So Karthika, I go to you now.
Thank you, Ximena. And I mean, action speaks louder than words. And I think we've just said that a lot of times to ourselves throughout our lives. And I think this is the greatest example of that also, where we do have a bit of understanding of, oh, how would it look from a theoretical standpoint, or how are we supposed to look at this? But sometimes it's just much simpler. While we came together to develop and host and organize the fair project, we had a direction in mind, like Isha said. We knew that we wanted to create a space where young people can come together and interact. But the contents of those interactions, the nature of those interactions, were all up to the world, for the ecosystems to come together, for possibilities to meet each other. And similarly, at Kaihon, we knew that we wanted to do something of that space. We wanted to make sure that it's not forgotten. And all we focused on was the next step. And not everybody showed up every day, but someone showed up every day. And I think that changed everything. Because it was not about trying to carry the entire burden alone. It's about letting the world in, holding yourself and creating that space where you can see the world and let it into your own awareness and then navigate it more consciously. So there were a couple of insights that came out of our experiences over the past years. First was to look inwards first. We try to understand the world, but I think one thing that requires the most amount of understanding is ourselves. How do I perceive the world? What are my blinders? What are my lenses and my rose tinted glasses that I need to potentially be aware of? And then once we're aware of our own selves, we can look outwards. We can expand our awareness, not to judge, not to rank, not to determine which is acceptable or non acceptable, but to know. And as some of our conversations have led, while we are searching for the truth, it's important to search for the lies as well. Because the key is not knowing what's right. The key is to know what is out there and navigate that. And then it's about not giving up, even though it might sound like a tagline of a motivational speech. It is about being at it. And we have seen that throughout history. When we create a perception of doom and gloom in society, we often forget that there are a lot of policies which are still in play. Earth still flourishes. Our planet is still going, humanity still progresses. And that happens because we're persistently working towards creating better realities for ourselves. So rather than thinking of this as a new framework or a new approach or a new thought process, what we see this as something that's been age old. It's one of the reasons to why humans have evolved and come as far as we have. And this space is to invite all of us who, even though might not agree with this way of functioning, are open to sharing that space and functioning and walking together. So on that note, I will give the stage to Yonette. And thank you again for inviting us, and thank you for all of you for being such patient listeners.
Well, thank you, the three of you, each of you, for a wonderful presentation, very insightful. And I look forward, we have a healthy audience with us. So I'm going to ask everyone to allow themselves to join the stage and come up and let's have a conversation. We have 30 minutes of time to do that. So Franz, I see you there. I'm excited. You are I don't know if you're in Germany or you're in China or you're in Indonesia, and hopefully you can join Naisha, Rishika, and Utsav. Please join. Vidi, please join. Wendy, please join, so that we can hear your questions and comments while everyone is joining. I think this whole notion that there are no final solutions, only persistent participation, really rings through, whether we are advancing, theoretical frames, or we're working on the ground, or whatever we're doing, or we're learning an instrument, or learning a new language, or in higher education, or we're in elementary school, which I know, Isha, you've experienced quite a bit. The thing about the work here is this interdisciplinary focus that ICH really puts forward. I've had the privilege of being in some of the meetings and the thinking around, and there's a range of people. You have theorists and pure academics, to people working on the ground, and this intersectionality of these things. Talk a little bit more about how that experience has broadened each of your persistent participation.
I can actually take that, and I do see that people joining the stage.
Yes, we're having this as people join. We'll get to, yes. Go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead, Karthika.
I'd say something about how there've been academicians who've been theorizing policies, and they've been really passionate about the work they've been doing, and they're very senior at this point of time, which is another thing that I've found very interesting, because it's not just the silos of disciplines and professions, but it's also the age and the experience that comes along with it, and the absolute refresher they sometimes get when they get to know what, say, people younger to them have been doing on the ground. They've been and there've been conversations around individuals who've been focusing on very tangible, let's just say, popularly prudent things. For a particular organization, you need to have this structure, and this is the way you function. And at the same call exist other people who have been very free flowing in the way of functioning. So they've not really had, say, key indicators that would determine if they're successful or not. We've been more committed to the philosophical basis of their work, as opposed to what tangible, measurable, things. And you'd think that these individuals can't possibly see eye to eye, but then they get on call and they start talking, and something completely new emerges. Because both of them, and then I'm creating dichotomies here, because it's never dichotomous whenever conversations happen. What they often recognize, and what I've observed, is that they are still sitting with their own limitations, of their own limited point of view, because of their own contexts. And it finally breaks when they see the other side. And it's very similar to what we've done in FAIR as well, where we feel very strongly about things. And it's very similar to how, social media functions now. Oh, I feel a certain way about a particular individual. All of my posts are going to paint my opinions in that manner. And my ability to think beyond that becomes limited. In those calls, irrespective of age, irrespective of experience, irrespective of their position and their professional successes, I've observed people come together as human beings and interact with each other. In Havana, we had a former member of the parliament, a former head of state, an agriculturalist, an educationist, an innovator in the social impact sector, all of them sitting together and talking about society. And everybody had something to say. Because life does not happen in silos. And change does not happen in silos. And that's what we do at ICH. And that's one of my favorite things to do as well.
Yes. Well, I see France. Thank you for that, Karthika. I see Francis join. And Francis, you are systems thinker. And I don't know, are you in Germany today, France, or are you in Indonesia? Where are you? In China? But I'm curious to get your perspective because, like me, you're a hard scientist coming at this. How do we connect these dots? And given what the work we're doing more broadly with the systems thinking, let's hear from you, your take on this.
Thank you, Yonette, and thank you to all the presenters. For me, it hasn't been easy to wrap my head around what actually is humanity, and that's already my question. What is humanity? I heard Karthika's introduction, and I listened very careful. So, and I also understood the part with relating to reality and aligning to reality, not necessarily changing. There are things where in that philosophy, let me call it philosophy, which I think are really interesting because in the past we've done so many mistakes by trying to change too much. So I think maybe that is something which it's intended to be avoided. But if we don't change things, how can we make things better? And back to the question, what is humanity? Is it a collective of humans or is it a human trait?
And I think I'm glad that this question came because I've been plagued by this question ever since we started doing what we've been doing. You know, we had a conversation very recently where we were talking about how we often, to understand things, we require structure a little bit, and how the conversation was how you don't really need structure to understand everything. Sometimes things can be formless and shapeless, and we still have an understanding of them. And it just really helped me kind of wrap my head around humanity as well, because the moment we start to contain it, if it's words or it's diagrams or it's a definition for that matter, I think it starts to lose its essence. And this is very similar to what our learnings with building this community were like. Because with every community that gets formed, and when I say we, have like a lot of us who've been, at least I've been, you know, educated a certain way where I've been told that there are theorems and frameworks and systems and structures, and you have to understand them fully to completely grasp what you're dealing with. And I still agree that there are a lot of things which help. Like there are a lot of frameworks which actually help that understanding. But I've also realized that when we let things organically unfold, similar to how our community has unfolded, within which humanity manifests in multiple ways. So it often manifests in the human trait of just being compassionate, but that does not negate the fact that humans aren't capable of cruelty. So we can't really say that, okay, to be human is to be compassionate, because then that is just a factual, like it's not accurate, because a person who's cruel is also human. We could say that it's people coming together, but then that's also us defining what people look like, or it might also like, okay, this is what we deem as a person. And I'm at the risk of giving you not an answer, but an answer at the same time. When I'm like, it's for us, the center of humanity becomes a space where we let humanity unfold, whatever that might be. And it's through that evolution of, say, through action, through thought, through conversations, through collaborations. Hopefully one day we shall have the answer to that question, but we're also not in the rush to find the answer. We are in it for the journey.
Go ahead, Franz. You're unmute yourself.
Yeah, I would like to offer a perspective. Recently, I had a training online for senior experts that go outside and help others to solve some problems, from university to car factories or whatever. And the training was very much in the spirit of don't take our own prejudices, our own way of seeing the world, especially our post-colonial baggage with us, and see the world like that. But and my input into that round was that when I mean, when I say we, I mean our generation. Even I might be a little bit older, but I feel like this generation, which has the opportunity to experience globalization and see many different countries, they go into the world as humans, yeah, and there is a way to connect to people as a human without directly having to go through the cultural lens. And there is an author called Karel van Schaik. He's a Dutch guy, and he wrote a book called Being Human, and several books, and they identified several natures of human. The first nature of human is like we were when we were hunter-gatherers before civilization. Civilization brought us culture, but it brought us all the other things in science, for example, all the models we built, all the glasses we put on in order to try to understand reality. And they make us see things, but they also make us blind for other things.
You're on mute, Franz. You're there you go. You're back.
Sorry, yeah, accidentally pressed. I think what you're very often referring to is this first nature of humans. They can understand each other by a smile, by their mimic, by their gestic, and they know instinctively what is right and what is wrong. First nature is also what children are able to do instinctively. And the second nature is all the layers of culture and everything, which are on top of that, which actually enable us to live together as humanity, as a civilization in denser communities, but which also hinder us to see through certain, very human traits of people. So I just wanted to offer this perspective, which I think is really useful. Maybe it's helpful to answer the question, what is humanity?
Right. No, thank you. And actually that I will read up that book as well, actually. And thank you for that reference. But it also kind of, and it poses a question to me. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to ask questions when I'm
Of course. We're having a dialogue. We're having a conversation.
But I was also wondering when there's, because it's also about what we deem as human now, because that's another problem. And this is a very frivolous conversation I was having with a friend of mine, where they were talking about theorizing cuteness. And trust me, there is a point to this, which is, we often look at these robots and this AI models and, these small toys which get made, and they often exude a particular emotion. And it's not, I'm not talking about weapons right now. I'm talking about how they often look cute. And you have your Tamagotchis, which can be your pets, and they're actually robots. But then they exude a sort of humanness, and that humanness could be in the form of, say, cuteness, for that matter. And I say this because maybe we're increasingly moving towards that particular landscape now. Right now, we have, AI summits in even China, where they were talking about how we can have AI partners now. And that really complicates at least for me, when I'm thinking about it, that really complicates that terrain for me, where certain characteristics or certain, say, essentialities that you're trying to derive out of being human gets appropriated on other beings. Because I think these are very relevant conversations to have. And that's not to say that we possibly don't find those essentialities. Probably that is the answer, that we need to find something that is just fundamentally human, to tether ourselves to like what it means to be part of humanity. But it's a very interesting development even in our society, where maybe a person would be more attached to their, say, AI partner or companion than actual human beings, because of the kind of humanity the AI has shown that person. And that I'm not sure, like, what do you think about that, Franz? Because I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well.
I think not only AI, but a lot of things we meet in advertisement and sales, they try to reach our well, first nature. And one of that is, like you said, cuteness. That there's an instinct for everybody across cultures to recognize small children, for example, as cute. And there are many other traits, looks, which try to reach our first nature. So I'm not surprised that AI makes use of this in order to, well, what does it want to do? AI, I think one of the goals is to take the attention time, right? Our attention time is the scarce resource here. And if it can attract our attention by, for example, by cuteness and many other things, then it has achieved its goal. Yeah, that's what comes to my mind. Yeah.
Okay. So Isha and Ximena and Rishika and Vidi, how do we circle that back to the actions on the ground that you're actively involved in? I want to hear from each of you some perspective. Go ahead, Isha.
Yes, thank you so much for that. As Franz was talking about bringing, when you mentioned about children and how we learn from them, a lot of interesting experiences come to mind, because when you're working with younger children, they immediately tell you about what their firsts are. And that sort of, for adults, becomes a lens to revisit and wonder as to what did I look at this as. So often working with children, I think, does give one a glance and a glimpse into that relooking. And at the same time, what I would also want to bring to the discussion is that children often experience your presence or an adult presence through them experiencing relationships as well. So for them, it's not about the material or the content or the ways in which you spoke to them or you taught them or the role that you see and you play in their lives, but they're often translating things in the way they experience things and the way they're able to feel you, the way they're able to build that connection, that engagement and relationship with you. And so sometimes when you strip everything away, that becomes the most central part of connecting with each other. So for me, largely, when I look at humanity in the most simplest way, if I were to teach it to somebody, it's how we connect and engage with each other. Our qualms or our ways of approaching that is what perhaps becomes the foundations or the pillars of us exploring and living that humanity. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. Rishika and Vidya, do you have any questions? Yes, Karthika.
Sorry, I just saw a comment from Wendy's comment on the chat. So I just thought that we could probably address that as well.
Yes. So let's go. Let's hear from Rishika and Vidya, and then we'll go with the comment from Wendy.
Sure.
Oh, she can't access her camera. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. All right. Go ahead, Rishika, and then we'll come to Wendy.
I think when we're talking about first of all, Karthika, Isha, and Ximena, excellent presentations. I enjoyed it a lot. And on this conversation, as Karthika, you also mentioned, it's a question that perplexes me as well, because it makes me question the role of AI in terms of humanity. So the way I see it, there's always this separation, and I can't define where that separation comes from or how to describe it. But when I think about artificial intelligence, the words borrowed intelligence is what comes to my mind. I feel that the intelligence that is present or what it operates on is at the end of the day borrowed from humanity. So it becomes a little difficult to see how one can reconcile with it. It raises a lot of questions. I think it's too early for us to adjudicate upon this or to come to any conclusions as to how involved we want AI to be when it comes to humanity. But even then, somewhere along the lines, I feel like it's being pushed into our lives, whether we like it or not. And that also, at the end of the day, is a human decision that's being made. So whether it's usage of AI when it comes to conflicts, when it's usage of AI but it's also usage of AI when it comes to healthcare. So there's so much contrast and confusion. I think that we'll just have to sit back and observe, and then only maybe we could come to a conclusion and answer that question. Those are my 2 cents on it. And Vidhi, whatever other thoughts you have, please go ahead.
Biddy?
Yeah.
Yes.
Actually, I also had a question along to what Trishika talked about humanity and artificial intelligence, but I was thinking about what Ximena talked about in Cuba and how communities interact and how agency and I remember she talked about agency where building agency and connection leads to an impact and meaningful change. So I guess my question to her was that in communities, what is one way where people with different sense of reality, right, where they have different experiences, they have their own sense of reality and meaning making of their own experiences, how do you create that agency, that collective and shared agency that you sort of talked about when you were talking about your experience in Cuba?
Thanks, Piri, for that beautiful question. And I also love a lot the reflection from Rishika. It's a very interesting panel right now of dialogues and wonderings of how is humanity going to. I guess part of this question of what is humanity also entangled with how do we act in a community has to be with engagement from where we're acting. Also, as Karthika was saying, we are capable of kindness, but we're also capable of cruelty. So I also think like humanity is not the best at anything. We are just able to fail. We're given the opportunity to fail once and over and over, and just be dumb enough to, or courageous enough to stand up again and try it again. Maybe make the same mistake, or maybe just try something else. So I think it also depends on through which lens humanity is being understood as sociological perspective, or somehow where I really, really like to experience my world is through the biological and the astrophysical, like astrophysicists for real, like this is the cosmos, this is the universe, this is the material, like going to the basis. And at least that grounds me a lot. Because we, in our existence, for these generations or for the past generations, we have a certain comprehension of what's going on and where we're trying to lead on. But then timeline is way bigger, no? So sorry that I'm going to spread wise. But again, if we're just trying to be humans and we are starting from this biological way of, okay, we started with surviving. And that's where we had to be. And we always come back to that point. But then we're also allowed the possibility to create. And that's not always a possibility in other spheres to happen. So being able to interact in this community, for example, in Callejón de Jamel, is part of this opportunity to create something, a bond, a connection, an empathy moment. As saying, I view this reality, I see there's a need because I identify this as a lack because probably someone or I had the privilege to get food every morning in my table. So how come there is not fresh fruit? How come I'll go to the supermarket and get nothing? So you start in contrast, in comparison, in this what I have and or cannot have. You start understanding other realities. So then we get in touch with our humanity and say, okay, I really want to understand a bit more and I want to engage and I want to commit. So I think also this agency comes from how committed I am with my decision and with actively being in this community. And we will not all be engaged in the same level. We will have grades of it. We will have moments. And that's also supernatural because probably this week, this month, I'll be leading and I'll be putting all of my effort. But the next month, something will happen and I cannot. But that also allows the space for new energy, new perspectives to refresh all of these actions. I think that's a bit my intake. So if someone wants to bring more insight on it, welcome.
No, that was brilliant. And it segues nicely to Wendy's question. She says she wants to endorse the point that great ideas and change makers come from anywhere and are everywhere. And yet we fail to hear their voices and nurture their ideas. Well, that's one of the reasons we're having these seminars. How can, and here comes the question, that was her comment, how can we best scale your approach? What's your advice? So that's Wendy's question. And I'll put that to you, Karthika, to lead, and Isha and Ximena. And then I want to hear Francis' perspective, given the paper that you just submitted, the whole systemic health check for cities perspective. So over to you while France comes back on camera and respond. So Wendy's question is, how can we best scale your approach? What's your advice?
I think one of a very good example would be how we have run FAIR all these years. I think we have more than 200 change makers at this point of time. And but before we even get to that, like how that ended up happening, I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about how scaling is even understood, right? And in general. We do talk about standardization a lot when we talk about scaling. We talk a lot about just getting to a level where there are just more and more people involved. And I do see value to that process in, under certain contexts. But if we need organic thought, if we need free thinking, if we need creative and critical thinking, if we want individuals to be more aware and make conscious decisions, because we are not leading them to an answer. I think the moment we start leading them to an answer, I think we'll be doing something horribly wrong with our own thought process. If that's the kind of ecosystem we wish to create, I think one thing that we've learned is it cannot be fast. It's not something that can happen overnight. Which is where the frameworks like persistent practice and being at it and continuing to do it over and over again comes. The other also is that I would use the word expansion as opposed to scaling to kind of like reconcile this idea that yes, we would want more and more individuals to find themselves within the space. But that's what the desire is, to find themselves, not to find a space which then owns them, but to have a space they can own. And that can happen in countless ways, actually, and to each their own. I feel if with the FAIR project, if you call any of the change makers up today and ask them how their experience was, I feel you're going to get more than 200 different answers. If you'd ask anybody from Kai Horn who came to volunteer and just like contribute in any shape or form, even if you ask them to explain what the project was or what the initiative was, I think you'd get more than, say, 50, 60 responses based on who you're talking to. It's for us, it's not really about finding that ultimate answer or definition or space, which can then just define everybody. It's about just holding that space so that everybody can just hold it the way they want. And for us, I think that would be the closest we come to scaling. So we have moved to, say, 12 continents, and we look different in every one of them. That also would be scaling, but not in the sense we have popularly understood.
Yeah. And if I may add to this and what the FAIR project has really taught us as well as we've done these 7 editions is we tell them, and this is a personal belief as well, that this mindset is like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger it gets, right? And so in that case, it's not really about whose voices are heard and aren't heard, but there is that inner capability in each individual and hopefully and subsequently their surroundings and their communities to believe in themselves and to keep at it in terms of the next step that they could take. However, I do understand that there are so many people who can benefit from this muscle or from exercising this muscle. And so yes, when we're looking at, I think every social impact sector or a network or an organization is always riddled with this question in terms of how do we scale? And we start with why do we want to scale and what does scaling means and
Right.
in the etymology of everything.
Mhm.
But we've come to believe that the seeds that we sow through a change maker will then also have ripple effects. So for me, that acts also as scaling, but it will be difficult to quantify that and to trace that journey all the time.
Mhm.
So that's equally something that I'm curious about in terms of how it's possible to navigate that expanse, which will then ultimately be able to define our scale, perhaps not in conventional terms.
Mhm. So it comes down to what is the purpose
I'm just
and
going to quickly
how.
come in.
Yes.
And yeah, I apologize. I would want
No,
like
go
Ximena to
for
add
it.
to
Go
as well.
for it. Yes.
But no, it's something that Isha said that kind of triggered that thought, which was we do see that. We do say that, and it's very fair that a lot of change makers do not get heard or do not get the platforms that they deserve, do not get the attention that they deserve. And what I've realized after having seen a lot of wonderful people do some really inspiring work is that there is a degree of power hierarchy involved in the desire to be heard as well. And I really think that we should, like all of us collectively, should think more about that, because it's not about just being heard. It's about whom we are being, like who is listening to us, where are we getting the attention from, which platform are we hosted on, and a lot of that is about how our at a global level how we are functioning, how awards are given out, how recognition is distributed. And just because recognition is distributed a certain way does not mean that anything that stands outside of that framework does not hold merit. And if people who are part of our ecosystem, I feel like somewhere on the line we do try to do that, can internalize that it's not external validation that determines the value of their contribution, but it's interaction with reality. I think that itself is a little bit of it's a sigh of relief, then you're free. Then you're actually free to do whatever you really, really want and contribute in ways that make sense to you, as opposed to what makes sense to the hierarchies and structures that govern us. So yeah, that was my thought. But I think Ximena, you had something.
So it is very as we wind down, this is a very important point, and we've discussed this, I think, at advisory meetings. But more broadly, your perspective needs to influence philanthropies, because we've talked about the AVPN, where they're looking at building thriving impact through ecosystem from the Asia perspective. And you talk about how people are awarded, how things are funded, but bringing this perspective to philanthropies so that the funding landscape can incorporate this approach, so that it's creating that spread effect across communities. And it's a different kind of scaling. It's how you redefining what you mean by scaling, and how that is influenced by how things are funded. So one of the things, and take a look at the AVPN network, and I'll share that with you all. They're trying to do exactly that in the Asian theater, mostly, and philanthropists are coming together and saying, this is what we would fund it, and this is how we will fund scaling. So your perspective is very critical to that, and I encouraged ICH to look to work being done by the AVPN. I'll share that with you. Sadly, we have exhausted our time almost, I see Francis back. So Francis, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to kind of weigh in on this, because I'm particularly interested in that systems perspective that's overlaid, and you having worked across the board with the International Society, International Science Council, and these new perspectives and how this is influencing broader thinking. This whole notion of scaling and what we mean by scaling and the approaches, just to get a little bit of your perspective on that. I don't know if you heard the conversation, but I'm putting you on the spot. Okay, go ahead, Franz.
Yeah, thank you, Yonette. I didn't hear like the last 5 minutes because my internet connection broke down. But I heard that you asked me to give a perspective from the systems perspective.
Yeah, because the question was how do you scale what ICH is doing, what they presented, and Karthika and Isha says, well, scaling for us means something different. We're taking it in another direction. We're looking at how we extend this across. They're working in 12 countries and coming up from the human perspective. The engagement of the individual is kind of the Bronfenbrenner social ecological framework, where we look at the individual in the context of the family, in the context of the community, the society, and the broader. So how those influences are coming up from the individual to their local community, to their subnational community, and it's a form of systems thinking. So I wanted to get you to weigh in on that.
I mean, the conventional way of thinking about scaling is, of course, economies of scale. That is something which was successful on a micro scale can be scaled up and successful on a larger scale. I'm not so sure if that's necessarily what this group is looking for.
Exactly.
Because you lose a lot. This
Yes.
is the kind of scaling which I did and had to do, for example, in Bill and Melinda Gates supported programs. You help one or two farmers, and then it's successful if like thousands of farmers can do the same thing. But my impression was that the examples presented are very idiosyncratic, very specific, very unique. And maybe if there's a network of unique examples which can stay at a small scale, maybe more from the International Center of Humanity governed under the idea of like a polycentric governance scheme, that could be much more useful than the conventional scaling up idea. When it comes to systems approach, my experience is, let's be careful with that, because very often it scares away politicians and other scientists who are used to think in very deterministic and, let's say, traditionally positivistic scientific frameworks. But the way I have heard the examples here is that there's a kind of natural systems thinking connected to the case studies which were presented.
Yes. So on that note, I encourage you, Karthika and Isha and Ximena, and to engage Franz, because it helps you as you respond to and you clarify this perspective and approach, which is very tangible, and it can be somewhat of a quote unquote paradigm shift, if I may use that deterministic phrase. But there are other perspectives, and that's where we are, and that's a sort of a radical change in the way, which is good, in which we kind of bring this back around. And over time, the spread effect will become economies of scale. So it's inexorably bound up, but you're bringing new insight, a refreshness, a freshness to how we engage individuals in society, and really finding that way. So I thank you for this presentation. We're just a minute to go. I'm happy that Trans could have joined us, and I thank Wendy for her comments, and I thank you, Rishika and Vidhi, for joining and giving your perspective, and of course the three presenters eloquently shared some very robust and thought-provoking ideas. So thank you, and with that, I'd like to bring this seminar to an end. So onward and upward.
Thank you very
Take
much.
care.
Thank you so
Okay.
much. Bye
Bye-bye.
bye, everyone.